when you have to choose between galat or zyada galat. Those moments, what do you choose? How do you choose?
I think so I am a firm believer of the fact that you always have a choice. Okay? Whether it is galat or galat, I think as long as you are able to rationalize the decision that you are making and why. And you have to ask this question 6 times, 6 whys. Why to every answer that you give to yourself. The generational gap is real. The way they look at the world, the way they look at things versus the way I look at things, very different. And it's true for how I look at things and how my parents look at things, right? You need to have a bunch of friends around you that are going to be lifelong friends who can give you feedback, who will take you aside and say, boss, ye jo tu kar raha hai, galat. There are a whole host of macro environments that are playing in right now. You're having a situation where, we've just looked at the interest rates go up. We've seen the China crisis, we've seen the Ukraine war. So a lot of these things are sort of coming in to create a little bit of uncertainty in the market.
लेकिन मैं a lot of people see कि HR department काम नहीं करता है.
I invite them to come and work with us.
Greetings everyone. In this edition of Exploring Minds, we have with us today the Managing Director at Morgan Stanley, Mr. Rajat Mathur. Mr. Mathur has been at the helm of the function for over 25 years. He started his adventure company, later on went on to start his life skill consultancy services for young people. He's extremely enthusiastic about climbing, hiking and mountaineering. And when he's not climbing a mountain, he's writing books. So thanks a lot for coming onto our podcast, sir. A pleasure to have you.
Thank you very much for the invite, and thank you for all the good words that you said.
So how was your recent trip to Jaipur, sir?
Very interesting. So I was doing yet another student interaction. That's something that I've really started to enjoy now. So it was all centered around a student interaction and some spending time with some really bright minds doing very interesting work in the design and development of products. So a really good time there.
By any chance you got out of the city to explore certain parts?
Well, not really, not this time, but I'm very familiar with Jaipur. When I was getting married, my wife's family was in Jaipur. So I've done enough road trips from Delhi to Jaipur.
Because you're adventure geek, this is not an adventure string, but Nahargarh side pe, they've started hot air ballooning. So 4 a.m. in the morning, above the mountains, 4,000 feet, peculiar, super interesting, amazing view.
It's on my list of things to do. Wasn't able to do it this time, but I'm sure there will be an opportunity in the future.
Definitely. So you did your college from St. Stephen. How was it that time? What were you thinking of? What were you dreaming of?
Well, I think at that point of time and in that era, for any science student, it was either you become a doctor or an engineer, right? Unfortunately for me, neither of them materialized. But I did sort of get into Stephens, and probably some of the best years that I spent in a college, in a hostel, doing stuff that I wanted to do was at Stephens. So for me, it was an extremely enriching 3 years that I spent there. Got to experience a lot of new things, made a lot of friends that still remain friends, 30 years later. So yeah.
And shift kaise hua to sciences, to human resource, and then eventually coming into the finance world?
I think for me, most of the decisions at that point of time were more default than design. So, I come from a services background. We had limited exposure to what we call the civilian world. All right. So when I went from Army Public School to Stephens, for me that was my first exposure to outside of the more broader Army cantonment life. I think as you started to interact with people over there and you started to interact with people from various backgrounds, you realized that there was a world outside of the forge, right? And at that point of time, everyone was talking about two things. Either you do the UPSC or you go do an MBA. I couldn't get my head around UPSC, so I followed the masses and decided to do an MBA. I was fortunate enough to get into Symbiosis, and I did my masters over there. The choice within the masters was also sort of driven largely by what I saw the peers doing. Someone would come and speak to us about something. You got enchanted by that. Someone would give you a tip about what kind of career you can have. You absorbed that. But eventually I chose to be an HR professional.
Wow. And what was your first job out of your MBA?
So I joined Tata Consultancy Services. It was a placement from campus. It was TCS had what we used to call dream company status.
अभी भी होता है.
So I got TCS in the HR team in Mumbai, and spent a couple of years there.
And what were the key choices you made during those days which led you to where you are now? Walk us through the key moments, key decisions. कैसे shape करते हुए आप यहाँ तक पहुँचे सर?
I think there have been a fairly large number of decisions that have happened, right? Some good decisions in hindsight, some not so good decisions in hindsight, and some absolutely abysmal decisions, right? That you would rather forget. So while I was at TCS, I moved to Delhi, and there I came across someone who was doing training, consulting. And I got sort of enamored by that, and I said maybe I should also do training. I always enjoyed speaking in public. So I said I'll start my own consulting firm. That time I did quite a bit of work with Pepsi in their sales and distribution business as a trainer. So I thought I'd found my calling, and I spent a lot of time then doing training. But very soon, and perhaps that's a decision that I should have done differently, was that I realized that when you're going as a 26-year-old out in the market and trying to convince people that you can train people that have a lot more experience than you, that have a lot more gray hair, it's not an easy sell. So the sort of business went up and down a little bit. I got some business, word of mouth, but I had enough times when I was turned out. So one of the things that was happening that time, when I got exposed to a friend running this business, was about adventure sports and outdoor adventure for children. And so I met a person who then became my partner, and we decided to sort of delve into adventure sports and running camps for children. It was a passion, it was an interest, and it's sort of the ideal scenario of combining your passion and your ability to earn and putting it together. So we did that for a couple of years, and then we sort of the dot-com bust happened, and we went belly up, and that's when I had to make a decision. We had a child on the way, not too much money in the bank, and a few loans to pay back. So in 2002, I decided to come back to work. And then it's sort of been a progression of a couple of different organizations trying to figure out what works, till I joined Morgan Stanley in 2008. And I've been here 15 years.
Wow. So how did you hear, when did you hear about Morgan Stanley for the first time? Or was it a dream job for you? कैसे आपने शुरुआत करा? How did you join?
So I think I came into the banking industry in 2004. And the moment you come into the banking industry, obviously you hear about all the names that are there. And clearly Morgan Stanley was a big player. So when I got the call from Morgan Stanley to join them as their head of HR, it appeared to be an exciting place. It was relatively small at that point of time. We've obviously grown significantly after that, but it was exciting. It was new. I'd heard really good things about the organization from people that I knew were there in the system, and so I took the plunge and joined them.
Wow. Can you tell us, for the audience who are watching, what does investment banking mean, and what's happening around the world right now in this field?
So, investment banking essentially is the ability to help clients manage and invest, right? Fundamentally, various streams, various businesses. You have got investment banking. You've got the global capital markets. You've obviously got the equities business. You've got you've got research units, etc. All of that is all investment banking. Morgan Stanley, of course, also has a very significant private wealth management business, right?
Right.
What's happening? So I think we're sort of at a stage where there are a whole host of macro environments that are playing in right now, right? You're having a situation where we've just looked at the interest rates go up. We've seen the China crisis. We've seen the Ukraine war. We've seen the debt ceiling debate. So a lot of these things have sort of coming in to create a little bit of uncertainty in the market. And I think where we are is that each organization is in their own way sort of figuring out what's the outcome that they want coming out of this, this sort of coming together of different macro situations. So that's really what's happening. It's uncertain times right now, but we've always seen that this is cyclic and it will come back. The question is, how long will the recovery be? And I think that's the debate that we're having.
Got it. And at your role, what are some challenges that you guys face at a senior position of HR like yours? And how do you see these macroeconomic trends where, jobs are getting dwindled, companies are on a hiring freeze and stuff like that?
So, there's a little bit of sensationalization that happens with this, right? If someone or some organization is right sizing, then they are doing it taking into consideration a lot of things, before they make the decision. It's not a decision that organizations want to make because it does impact individuals, but sometimes because of costs or because of just rationalization of headcount or just managing performance, you make these decisions. So again, what happens with these decisions is that they get picked up by media and put out there, right? But no one's talking about all the hiring that these organizations have done in the past few years, the growth that they've seen, the opportunities that have got created, etc. So my advice to everyone is that, sure, read the news and read the news regularly, but sort of rationalize and perhaps look at some other macro numbers before you take a decision on the doom and gloom scenarios that everyone sort of talks about.
And what's the definition of talent according to you?
Anyone who has the ability to do a job and do a job well, right? That for me is talent, right? Now, you can then sort of build on that and to say we want people who have fungible skills, people who have learning agility or learning ability, people who are aspirationally more motivated than others. That's a build up to the definition of talent. But fundamentally, talent for me is the ability of an individual to be able to do the work that has been given to them and do it well.
And when you run an organization like this big, what's the funnel like? How do you get to know, there is a dearth of talent, you need to hire a lot of people. What's your acquisition strategy? How do you attract talent?
So in India, and I speak in general for all organizations, not specifically for mine, the starting funnel is large, right? You have a very large pool of talent that is willing to apply to you, right? And you basically, your job is to narrow that funnel down to find the talent in that large pool. So you do all of the marketing related activities to make sure that people are coming into the larger funnel, but then the hard part is to actually be able to filter it down to the couple of percent people that you really need at this. What are we doing about it? We've gotten smarter in terms of using AI ML based applications. We've become more oriented towards open sourcing, so that everyone has a fair shot at any jobs that we post, versus sort of doing targeted hiring at specific schools, for example. So these are all initiatives that we've sort of taken to make sure that we are able to capitalize on this massive talent pool that resides in India.
And you've worked overseas as well as locally. Tell us the difference between the Indian talent versus the talent abroad.
I think the biggest difference is scale. I think in India, my ability to find any type of talent that you want is there, right? You can throw me the most complex of job descriptions, and I will find you talent that exists in India. I think that fundamentally is the strength of the Indian market. The size of the market adds to the depth of the talent that's available. So you now are sitting on the ability to have very widespread skills and depth in the talent pool. I think that is what differentiates India. That's why so many organizations are looking to India to invest. Sorry.
I'd like to have some water.
I'm good, thank you.
Perfect. So, how do you encounter fake profiles? As in lead, do you encounter this problem of having a lot of fake profiles, because there are always the reality versus what's being posted on the media?
You do, and I think organizations are getting smarter and smarter about able to catch that and detect that. Again, you can do that, but if you ever get caught in this process on an ethics sort of platform, then that could very adversely affect your career. So, advice number one: don't do it. But you have all sorts of people in the world, and people try and see how they can sort of create these fake profiles or do stuff that will get them through the door, right? Eventually, it catches up on you in some form or fashion. Somewhere, you will slip, and you will get caught, and the implications or the consequences of getting caught at that stage are far more than being honest about the application process. So yes, we have mechanisms. We do stringent background checks. We sort of sanitize our process regularly to be able to make sure that we can detect this. But my advice to everyone is just don't go down that path.
And you spoke about a lot of AI and ML applications in this process. What are those things how are you using AI and ML in this thing?
So recruiting is I think the one that sort of stands out, right? There is no way organizations in India can deal with the volume unless they use good tools, right? So we are using tools, AI ML based tools that enable us to sort of funnel the talent pool, right? I think as we start to now look at, for example, learning platforms, there's an opportunity to do that.
Right.
Can we get smarter with employee queries? And a lot of organizations are doing that. Much like what the banks are doing, right? Your generic queries are getting answered by a chatbot, right?
Yeah.
I think a lot of organizations are now starting to look at chatbots to handle employee queries. So the applicability of that is only increasing. but at the end of the day, my function is a people-oriented function,
Right.
And the expectation right now is that we still there's a high touch feel need of employees. So you're going to sort of have to gradually get into this mode of sort of becoming a self-service organization. But till that time that happens, you still have to sort of provide the touch feel to employees.
So
I invite them to come and work with us. You know, every now and then there are these stand-ups and things that take a dig on it. I think it's you sort of laugh about it and get on with life because you know, I think some of the decisions that we have to make are probably some of the toughest decisions that you have to make in an organization.
Right. And how do you think AI will impact the talent in India? Do you think the jobs are going to dwindle, or there will be certain jobs which will be created by the virtue of AI? What's your understanding of this?
You know, when I started working 30 years ago, the sort of belief over there was computers आएंगे और सबकी नौकरी चली जाएगी.
हाँ.
30 years later, if anything, the computers have only increased employment.
Right.
So humanity will adapt as technology changes happen, right? Will it make life easier? Yes. They said mobiles make life easier. You know, now it's very easy to get data, but it also has its own sort of side effects, right? So with each of these things, you know, we will evolve, we will adapt, we will adopt, and we will continue to thrive. As long as there's a decision to be made about people, you know, people jobs will exist.
And we'll dive deeper into this. Tell us about certain skills, certain values that you think कि है ना, चाहे AI आ जाए, कुछ भी मिमिक कर ले, लेकिन ये चीज़ मिमिक नहीं कर पाएगा.
Honesty, integrity, emotion.
हाँ.
I think these are very fundamental to some of the decisions that we have to make. So, and I don't know, maybe in the future, you know, you'll be able to replicate that, but at least in the near term horizon, I would be surprised if they can do that. So like I said, I think as long as it involves people and as it involves feelings, etc., there's a need for humans to be involved.
Got it. And you spoke a lot about decision making. Tell us what are the most, tell us about the worst decisions in your life from the hindsight.
Oh, how many do you want to know?
As many as you can.
So let me give you the big ones. My decision to quit my job and start, right? It wasn't a bad decision, but I think it was out of sync with time, right? Our starting of an adventure company at a time where adventure wasn't an acceptable term in the Indian household, perhaps too early for our times. For me, I think that's something that I sort of reflect on every now and then. A couple of decisions about changing jobs, because I was the young, impatient person who sort of thought with the heart and not the head at that time. Perhaps in hindsight, may not necessarily have been warranted, right? But nothing that sort of I look back and really worry about. They were learning experiences. When I started off on my own, it was a huge learning experience. I think I understood more about finance and marketing than I would have being in an organization. I learned about how you need to be smart about your money at that point of time. So I think they've been sort of learning moments for me. Going out and working outside the country, everyone sort of gets excited and starry-eyed about going outside. but it comes with its own set of challenges, right? So I think these have been moments that you've sort of gone through, learned, and reflected on. And as long as you can sort of look back and say, I learned a lesson, I learned something from what I did, or a decision that I made.
But tell us about जैसे आपने adventure business शुरू करा. Why do you think that was a wrong decision?
I don't think it was a wrong decision. I think it was too ahead of its time.
And why do you?
Because I don't think the audience that we were targeting was prepared to spend money on adventure, not at the scale that we wanted, right? Would I do it again? I often think about it and say perhaps yes, but time passes, you get different anchors, your sort of your life goals change, you have a lot other stuff that sort of determines what you do and what you don't do, so things change.
And what have been some decisions that you took and they paid off massively?
I think going back to work at the time, much as I didn't want to, we obviously had a situation where we'd put in and invested a lot in in the business, and we had to close it down. I think in hindsight that was a good decision to make at that point of time, both personally and professionally. I think the move to join Morgan Stanley, I think really good decision. The move to go out and spend a couple of years outside to really get a broader context in life and in the work environment, good decision in hindsight. So I think all of these have been decisions that I sort of now appreciate in hindsight.
Tell us the difference now. When you are taking they say that you take a decision, not good or bad, later the consequences tell you ki was it a bad one or a good one. When you take, it's a decision. So while you are taking decisions, what are some things that you keep in mind, or what's the analogy that you have derived, what's the observation that you have derived कि यार जब भी मैं ऐसा करता हूँ ना मेरे से गलत decision होता है, जब भी मैं ऐसा करता हूँ I take a right decision.
So I think am I making a hard decision when a heart decision is required, and am I making a head decision when a head decision is missing? And sometimes we sort of confuse that, and sometimes we sort of cross over on both sides.
Can you give us an example?
So let's say, leaving a job, right? Every now and then, you may be upset about something. Maybe you've not got promoted that year, or maybe you've not got the raise that you wanted, right? And you sort of say, I will go somewhere else and find out. For me, that should actually be a head decision, not a hard decision. But I've made a hard decision, and when I've sort of gone there, I've realized that, and like now I look back and say 30 years, you should expect that 5, 6, 7 years of your life will not go to plan, right? But every time it doesn't go to plan, you sort of make some radical upheaval and change. Perhaps not the right thing to do. Perhaps you need to sort of mull over it and think about it and accept the fact that there will be years that will not go per plan. But that doesn't mean that you sort of up and out.
In the class you taught ki, sometimes indecision creates a havoc. Can you give some example of some indecision, some interesting story which created a havoc later?
We've sort of encountered a few situations where it wasn't indecision, but it was a decision that if it had not been made, could have hurt someone. So we've had a couple of incidents while climbing where So I'll give you an example where we were climbing a peak in 2019. My daughter was part of that, and the head of the expedition leader basically took a call not to allow an individual to climb beyond, I think it was about 4,500 meters. And he took a call based on what he had observed that individual doing and how that person was progressing. It didn't go well with that individual, and the individual argued saying, I paid for this expedition, I should be allowed to climb, and all of that stuff happened. But the expedition leader stuck to his guns and didn't allow the individual to climb. While the rest of the expedition went up, I was at base camp with that individual, and that person had a serious health issue. And believe me, we were able to retrieve and get that person down to the road head, because he was at that
point
at the base level. If he had climbed any further, the ability to retrieve and get that individual down to the base road head would have been a massive challenge. I mean, I would think that we might have lost him. So there are these decisions which have to be made where sometimes you have to be firm with the decision that gets made and drive a decision based on experience, where if the person had basically shrugged his shoulders and said, you do what you want, it could have cost a life.
Got it. And there are certain times when you have to choose between galat or zyada galat. In those moments, what do you choose? How do you choose?
I think so I am a firm believer of the fact that you always have a choice. Okay? Whether it is galat or this thing. I think as long as you are able to rationalize the decision that you are making and why. And you have to ask this question 6 times, 6 whys. Why to every answer that you give to yourself. If you're able to rationalize that decision, then go ahead and make the decision. You will never get all your decisions perfect. You will have situations where you will get some wrong, some very wrong, some very, very wrong. But that's life. You will learn and you will progress forward. So fundamentally, it's about the choice you're making, right? It's for you, that might be a choice of galat and bahut galat. For me, it may be a choice of theek and galat. For someone, it may be both galat or bahut zyada galat. So it's all about perspective, and it's about how you're sort of looking at that choice that you have in front of you.
What can someone at a college level do to ensure that they cultivate something in order to take right decision for their future?
I think self-awareness, and it's not an easy task to do, is something that people need to practice. You need to have a bunch of friends around you that are going to be lifelong friends who can give you feedback. Who will take you aside and say, boss, ये जो तू कर रहा है गलत है, या ये तू सोच रहा है, तूने क्या इसके बारे में सोचा है? Because we all live with our biases, right? We all have our own way of making decisions or sort of calling or anchoring a decision, right? But you need someone who can be your sounding board. So that's one. 2 is, a lot of decisions get made under pressure, and sometimes a lot of that pressure comes from how financially stable you are.
Right.
Okay. So one of the strongest advices that I give to everyone is, whatever it is, start to put money aside, start to invest. The earlier you start, the earlier you will become financially free. Right? And the earlier you're financially free or financially stable, the better decisions you.
Right. Now tell us about what have been your hardest conversations in life?
Other than the one with my wife?
Of course.
I think the kids, my children, right? The generational gap is real, right? The way they look at the world, the way they look at things versus the way I look at things, very different. And it's true for how I look at things and how my parents look at things, right? So I think for me, the bridging of the generation gap is probably the toughest of the conversations. At work, at home, I get more feedback at home than at work. But the reality is that I think generational gaps are very, very tough to bridge unless you sort of really step back and be and understand someone else's perspective. So for me, I think those are probably the toughest.
Give us an example of some, thoughts or some thinking node which
So simple example, like I'll give you a kid's example, right?
Huh.
So I used to tell my kids, I used to tell them saying that, two things I used to say. I used to say, practice your writing
हाँ
because you should have nice handwriting,
ठीक है,
right? And my kids come back and tell me saying that we don't need to write.
we just type.
Everything gets typed,
Huh.
right? And it's a very interesting perspective that you need to understand. The other is, just for example, math, right? We used to know our tables, right? And I tell the kids, I said, you should know your tables, and they said, why? It's the calculator is available. It's available on your phone, and eventually the phone will go away, and you will be able to do it, virtually. So why do we need our tables?
Huh.
And it's a lot of these things, right? You should know this information. Why? It's available on Google. You type it, you'll get it. So I think that's something that we're doing. The other is about the conversation about, for example, what matters. So I'm sort of in the middle of the generation where the earlier generation above me was buy a house, find stability, all of that stuff, right? We were in that mixed generation where we're saying, yes, buy a house, invest in a house, but you can do it later on in life. And then I'm talking to the new generation, which is saying, if you actually calculate the ROI, it makes more sense to rent a house than buy a house. So why should I buy it? And I'm saying, you should start to think about your retirement. And they're saying, we are 40 years away from retiring. Why should I start to think about it right now? Because you don't know what the world will look like later. So I think those are sort of conversations which are which create these very interesting dynamic around accepting someone else's perspective. And now when I think back and my my kids tell me that you don't have to learn it. You can Google it or find it or have access to a system that can give you that. It makes sense. It makes sense.
You spoke about so sometimes in your life you are under pressure. You have very little time. You have to make decisions quickly. In that situation, what do you do? How do you deal in this situation? Give us an example where you had a lot of pressure, बहुत कम time था, and what was the situation and how did you navigate through that?
Actually, irrespective of how much pressure you have to make a decision, if you can filter out the noise, you should generally be able to arrive at a reasonable decision, right? Again, the anchors that you use to make the decision is very important. So, what's your non-negotiable, right? If you're making a decision about your careers, for example, what's your non-negotiable? If you're sort of under pressure to make a decision about, buying decision, for example, you still need to go back to the fundamental thing as quickly as you can and say, this is the reason why I'm buying something, right? So yes, you can have impulsive decision making, and it has its own set of consequences. But if you can very quickly rationalize and quickly sort of put your anchors in place, you'll be able to you should be able to make good decisions.
Can you give us an example?
Impulsive decision versus rational decision.
Right.
My wife will say how I buy my cars, but I've gotten better with that.
Okay.
So earlier, my decision on buying a car would be based on, how it looks, and if I like it, then I will sort of go and choose that car. Now I think a lot about it's not a good example, but I think a lot about it. I do a lot of research around making decisions about cars. I'm just thinking of impulsive decisions now. Actually, I can't think of an impulsive decision that I've made in the recent past.
No worry.
Maybe I'm getting better at this. That's why I'm not making impulsive decisions. Yeah.
And how do you ensure कि आप जब एक decision ले रहे हो तब आप एक analysis paralysis mode में नहीं चले जाओ, because there is too much data to crunch, lot of variables into play. How do you ensure कि भाई decision लेना है, paralysis में नहीं जाना?
अगर तुम्हें मालूम है कि if you don't, what's the consequence of not making the decision? then you will make the decision.
When was the last time you went into analysis paralysis?
This morning.
Okay.
No. So I think it happens quite a few times
Huh.
because you don't want to deal with the consequence of that decision. Therefore, you try to kick the can down the road.
Huh.
But I think eventually you will have to make the decision. So it's only about buying time, and buying time is usually sort of anchored on, oh, I need more data or I need more information before I make the decision. But I think if you know the consequences of delaying the decision or not making the decision, and if they are significant, then you'll be forced to make the decision.
What were some toughest decisions in your life, sir? You can think through and tell us that this was the toughest. इसको लेने में मेरी जान निकल गई थी.
So I had a massive heart incident in 2018, and basically, and at the path of the recovery process, the doctor basically told me that तुम्हारा ये hiking, climbing, running वगैरह सब खत्म है. It's over. And I sort of went into this phase of almost depression, I'm going to call it, where the stuff that I really love to do in my life was being taken away from me. And then I read up about it a lot, and one day over a meal, my kids said to me, both independently, that my daughter said, oh, you're not going to be able to climb with me anymore, and my son said, oh, you're not going to be able to play cricket with me, and it really hurt. And that's when I sort of went back and said, I need to change this. So I went back to the doctor and I had the conversation, and obviously doctors being doctors, and he's a really good doctor, but doctors being doctors said, it is dangerous. So I had a choice of either accepting that, or as I threatened him, I said, then I guess I'll have to change my doctor. So we agreed. We reached a point where we agreed that he would allow me to do certain things, but within limitations, and I would monitor my heart rate and my body and everything else.
Right.
So that was 5 years ago, and today I think we've been able to achieve a lot more by doing that. But it was an extremely painful process, because I remember the first time I went down, I couldn't even walk 100 meters. Right. To now, where I told you I just came back from Everest Base Camp.
Yeah.
Life's gotten better, but the process of getting from that 100-meter walk and tiring and sitting down to being able to run my first 10K at the first anniversary of the heart attack, etc. All of that, it was extreme, physically very challenging to do, and at the back of your mind, you're always thinking that I hope I'm doing the right thing. I hope this is not going to sort of cause further issues. Right, but touch wood, things have worked out.
Great. And how did your love for mountains and peaks start?
I have no idea. I think it started very early with going for smaller treks and going out. I was always an outdoors person. My father was a very outdoors person, so it was almost always that we were encouraged to go out and play and everything else. And I think getting exposed to the outdoors, coming from a services background, I think that all of that sort of got together to trigger this love for adventure. It took a little bit of a pause in the middle, but when I was able to, then I went back to climbing, and I've sort of been pretty regular with my climbing in mountains. I think I'm the happiest there. I'm happiest in the mountains.
And what all peaks have you covered?
So a couple of them I've climbed: Jamshed Kangri, Shidhar, Ladakhi, then a couple of other smaller ones. Yeah.
Got it. And what has your passion of climbing mountains taught you?
Everything is possible.
Tell us some interesting stories of some hiking which had a very which had a significant impression on you.
So quite a few. I mean, look, there have been times when I've been climbing and very close to giving up.
Okay.
There have been times where I have given up, and then someone has sat me down and said, "You can't give up. You have to climb." But I realized over time that it's a mental game. It's less physical, more mental. It's about you staying strong and pushing yourself, and you're able to do that. I've seen that with myself. I've seen that with a lot of people that I've climbed with, that it's at the end of the day a lot of mental. They say that if you look at some of the movies around climbing Everest, you will find that physical is only a part of it. It's really about your mental strength to sort of continue to push beyond the pain boundaries and climb.
Wow.
So that for me, that's my biggest learning.
And during those times, I'm sure that you must have seen some great mountaineers. How do they keep themselves resilient?
They're a different breed. I think one of the things that I sort of, we all worry about end of life. I think a lot of the mountaineers, a lot of the professional mountaineers that I met, I don't think death exists in their dictionary. It's fearless, but it's also about so the good ones. They're very sensible about how and what they do, right? But there's a certain amount of lack of fear and lack of fear of death specifically that exists in these. It's a different breed. It's very difficult to describe them. You have to meet someone to really.
Would you like to cover the locus of control wala part and because I asked this later question because वो earlier आपने बोला था brink of life and resilience. Would you like to cover something else?
So locus of control is interesting. I think we worry as human beings about far too many things that we don't have control on. And I'll give you the story. So my boss and I were driving for a meeting, and I was the junior one, so obviously I was driving, and we got stuck in a traffic jam. And in classic fashion that everyone does, what do you do in a traffic jam? You start to honk and you start to roll the windows and yell at the people around you, etc. And I kept doing that for maybe 10-15 minutes. I think I was making a nuisance of myself in the room. And my boss was very patient. He was listening to the radio and just humming away while I was doing all of this honking and rolling down the window and yelling and all of that stuff. And he sort of observed this for 15 minutes, and then he said to me, the next time I pressed the horn, he asked me, he said, what purpose has that served? And I said, I'm trying to clear the traffic. And he said, so has it got cleared? And it made me think and pause. And then he said to me, he says that, look, you're blowing the horn or you're rolling the window out and yelling to people is not doing anything. You're stuck in a traffic jam. Unless you're getting out and clearing the road over there, this is outside your locus of control. So stop worrying about it. There's not much you can do about it. So sit back, start to enjoy the music. And it took me a little bit of time to sort of accept that. But when I did, for the next 30 minutes, I had a remarkably peaceful experience in the car. And that's something that has stuck with me. And every time now I get into a situation where I start to worry, I say to myself, is it in my locus of control? And if the answer is no, then in most cases, I'm able to walk away from that issue and shrug my shoulders and say, okay, let's get on with life.
Good way of de-stressing yourself.
It is. I think you will realize that we stress about far too many things that are outside our locus of control.
And how do you de-stress yourself? What are some other ways?
I'm a outdoors person. I run, I swim, I bike. Anything that gets me physically activated, that's my release. Reading to a certain extent, but for me it's the sort of physical release.
Wow. And what would be your last set of advice for students who are in college? How should they watch out for their career, and how should they make right decisions about their career, choosing their career?
So there are two aspects to this I just want to talk about. One is what are you doing with yourself? What's the profile that you are building, right? If you're coming from the same institute as the person sitting next to you and you have the same CGPA and everything else, what distinguishes you, right? And that sort of goes into a broader framework of what are the experiences you are gathering, what is the knowledge or skill that you are developing that can distinguish you from the person next door. I don't think people spend enough time in building their profile at college, so that's an opportunity area for folks. Communication and the ability to communicate is another very key factor. You may be fantastic with your technical skills and
Right.
your knowledge, but if you're not able to tell someone that, then
What's the use?
then it's an issue. Then it's a challenge. Sorry, what was the other part to the question?
That was, how should people who are in their college life can go about choosing the right?
Okay.
Yeah.
So this is another part of what I call the decision anchors. You need to be very clear about what matters to you. I call it your career anchors, right? Is money the most critical aspect for you? Is the kind of organization very critical to you? Is is the kind of job that you're going to do important to you? Making a social impact, is that important to you? There are a whole host of characters that I think you need to start to think about. I'll give you a simple example, right? Location, right? A lot of people don't think about it, but then they realize that they can't stay away from family, or their family can't move, right? That could be a constraint for you, but you need to recognize that constraint. So I think there are these anchors that you have to think about. But within those anchors, you have to have what I call your non-negotiables, which is that if this does not happen, then it does not work for me, or only if this happens will it work for me. Those non-negotiables, and they will develop over a period of time and may change over a period of time, are very important to establish as you look at making decisions about your careers, right? It requires time, it requires effort, but it requires intention more than anything else. You have to become intentional about what and how you're managing your careers, even at the college level.
Wow. And what are some non-negotiables for you, sir?
Health and wellness is a big non-negotiable for me. My getting out in the mountains is a bit of a non-negotiable for me.
True.
Family time is a non-negotiable for me. So those are I think at this age and stage of my career,
Got it.
those are my non-negotiables.
So tell us about the power of questioning, and which you demonstrated in today's class, where you asked, bunch of questions and navigated through. And in short, जो बच्चा बोलने वाला है आंसर, वो आपने पहले ही बोर्ड के पीछे लिख रखा था. So where do you derive this ability of influencing decision making of others?
It's the strength of the conversation you can have. It's about knowing, in training language, they call it, or even in theater, they call it knowing your audience, right? If I'm going and making a pitch about something, and that's what we were talking about with some of the students, I have a lot of things to say about my project.
Right.
But does that matter to the person who's making the decision about investing in your project, right? So I think you need to sort of flip this around and say, what is it that will get that person to say yes to my proposal, right? Is he or she looking for, good governance? Is he or she looking for sustainability of the business? Whatever are the parameters. And then you have to position your pitch and your conversation such that you're meeting the audience's demand, right? The issue that we have with a lot of communication is that I have all of this information and I just want to put it out there. And a lot of that could be irrelevant to the individual. In fact, that is likely to sort of take you into sidetracks and derail the conversation versus sort of targeting it to what you want. At the end of the day, you want a positive decision from the individual, and then you work backwards to say, okay, to get a positive decisions, I need to make this person happy on account 1, account 2, and account 3, right? Now, how do I make the person happy on account 1? I have to say these things. On 2, I have to say these things. On 3, I have to say these things. The other is all sort of peripheral in terms of all the communication and all the information and data that you're giving to the person.
But give us example, आपने क्या-क्या ऐसे सवाल पूछने की कोशिश करी थी जिससे Prachi said the same card which you wrote.
That was about channeling the conversation. So I knew what I wanted her to get to.
True.
Right? I put that up early in the morning.
Right.
So now the question was, how do I process her answers in such a manner that I get her to think about it? So remember the exercise that we did about cave rescue, right? By sort of throwing in social parameters for individuals, you suddenly got them to think differently, because everyone has biases, everyone has a view, right? So, when we said this person is an ex-army person, suddenly the perspective of the individual changed because you have a certain image about what an ex-service person is. Right. Or we said that this person has a political orientation, right? Suddenly there was each of us then processed that differently and said, okay, if the person is an ex-army person, he must be this. Or if she is politically inclined, then she must be this. And we made our decision. So every time I throw in a fact, depending on where I want to take this conversation, I sort of influence it. So that's how this process works. It's basically a channeling exercise to get them to the decision that you want.
Thanks a lot for doing this for us. And super amazing insights in the podcast. Thanks a lot.
Thank you for inviting me. I had some really interesting questions with the group, and I really enjoyed interacting with the